Generosity is about giving without expectation of anything in return. It's about being generous in your assumptions until you find out what is actually true. Generosity of your trust is critical. Being generous may take more time or energy from you, and these can be roadblocks to making those choices. How might you want to embed generosity in your leadership approach moving forward? Hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm so glad you're here. I'm your host, Tosca Di Matteo, and I am a human skills expert. What does that mean? It means I help my audiences and leaders with their human skills, which are the precursors of people skills. These skills involve understanding yourself deeply, your patterns of thought, your patterns of behavior, so that you can make changes to get on a new growth trajectory in your career and in your life. If you want to learn more about the work that I do and can bring to your organization, visit CoachTosca.com. That's CoachTosca.com. I'm really excited today about the topic I'm bringing to you, which is about the gems of generosity in leadership. I actually did a newsletter on this topic in March. And if you missed it, you can also find it on my blog, on my website, CoachTosca.com. And I thought, you know what? This really deserves some more space, some more airtime to talk to you about the value of generosity as a leadership quality. And also the newsletter got some good traction. I felt like it resonated with people. So let's talk about generosity. Now, you may have heard of a lot of different labels of leadership out there, but frankly, I'm not into the boxes or the labels. And like I said, in one of my most recent newsletters, I talked about generosity as a leadership trait. It's a pillar for how you can think about what it means to be a leader. Sometimes these labels that are out there about whatever it is, whether it's servant leadership or, whatever those titles are, sometimes that can leave us a little bit disconnected from what our authentic leadership style is. And so I'm offering generosity as a core pillar to leadership. And I think that generosity really needs some space these days. I mean, you have labels like narcissism that can leave us with an all or nothing approach. But what we need is to be able to operate in a gray area. We need to operate looking at individuals for what they are and who they are versus using labels to decide how we're going to treat somebody. And listen, with boundaries being obliterated for so long, sometimes the pendulum has swung far in the other direction, meaning we lead more so with this idea of what's in it for me or the Whiffam model, and perhaps revert into rugged individualism because we've just been overextending. We've been asked to do so much with so little in return that we then withhold ourselves from generosity when really that's hurting us more than it's helping us. And, another reason why I think generosity needs more space today is because sometimes we do have unreasonable expectations placed on us, and this squeezes us for time. And so anything that feels like it's not a must-do gets dropped off entirely. And therefore, where is the space for generosity if we are packed so tight in our days with our objectives, with our goals? Where's the space? And my invitation to you is to create space for generosity. On top of these things, we also feel more isolated and alone than ever. There's so much information out there around the loneliness epidemic because electronic communication is not the thing that's going to make us feel more connected. Remote work can make us feel isolated literally as well. And the world, frankly, is still trying to reconfigure community connections in a post-COVID and polarized world. So no wonder it's hard to find connection and that sense that you're not alone. And generosity as a leadership trait can really help with all of this. It offers so much, not just to the receiver of your generosity, but also right back to yourself. And in a transactional world where folks are getting frustrated by that feeling, they may not be able to label it, but generosity can bring us back to actually building relationships in authentic and genuine ways, because a transactional approach to leading isn't going to be the thing that does it. Generosity, just to set the playground here, is about giving without expectation of anything in return. And when you are truly doing this, when you are truly unattached to receiving anything in return, you don't risk getting into resentment with anybody. And that is the beauty. So part of generosity is you really understanding and being clear, am I expecting something or not? Even if it's really below the surface. So that's just a good kind of dump check when you're doing something for somebody else. Is it out of generosity, or are you expecting something? And I want to talk about the fact that generosity comes in many forms. And I want to talk about a number of those forms it can come in, because I think the way perhaps we're conditioned to think about generosity might be in terms of, for example, financial position, financial giving. And there's so much more to what generosity can look like. First of all, generosity of time. It's our most precious resource. So carving out meaningful time with your team members is highly valued. You may not even realize how much your team wants to interact and talk to you, get your ideas, bounce things off of, make sure they're on the right track. And yes, the bigger the team you have, the harder it is to have one-on-one time on a regular basis, or on a weekly basis even. But there has to be time to give to your team and your team members. This is going to return tenfold. It means so much to them. So that's one way that you can be generous, is to make sure you have space on your calendar for your direct team members. Second, generosity of assumptions. This one is so huge. It can be so game changing. Are you filling in the narrative of a worst case scenario, or perhaps assuming the worst intentions? Flipping this is about being generous in your assumptions until you find out what is actually true. Because people know, they can sense if in the back of your head you're thinking that they were intentional in doing something that didn't go well, or doing something that hurt your feelings. You would be surprised at how many people are actually oblivious when they do something that hurts your feelings, for example. So when we can be generous in our assumption, that can help us stay open to learning more about the person, about the situation, or what have you. The third generosity is of acknowledgments. Do you look for ways to show your people that you notice their skills, that you notice their wins? Acknowledgments is much deeper than compliments. Compliments are surface. Acknowledgments really help a person feel seen or heard for who they are at their core. So it's not about complimenting somebody's shirt or their jewelry or their hair. It's about saying, I really saw how you held space for that conversation with that client and helped them to feel compassion for what they were going through. That's an acknowledgement. Generosity of care is the next one I want to share. Are you being generous in caring about your team, about your direct reports, about those individuals as a whole person, and not just for what they can do for you? And this goes beyond, for example, asking, well, how was your weekend? You know, it's about really showing them that you care about their health, their well-being, and how they're feeling, their mental health, and what motivates them, what they care about outside of the working hours. It's about saying, tell me more about how you prepare for a marathon, for example. What does that process look like? And you hear a lot from coaches, right, about this idea of curiosity, but it is an important aspect of generosity, because you're giving your time to show people that you care and that you want to learn more about who they are, what makes them tick, and what's going on in their life. The next generosity is of forgiveness. Are you willing to forgive so that you don't hold on to the baggage? Because that will impact how you show up for people. when you are holding on to grudges and not truly forgiving. And again, this is not about forgiving and forgetting. It's not about not taking in the learnings of who people are showing you who they are, but can you really forgive somebody for something that they did so that you can move on in that relationship in a kind way, in a clear way, and in a way that doesn't bring baggage with it. Which leads me to the next generosity, and that is a generosity of initiating difficult conversations. You taking that step to reduce the tension that you know is there. Or maybe you don't know that it's there, but you're wondering if it is. And maybe this is also connected to forgiveness, right? Maybe in order to really truly forgive, you need to have a difficult conversation to say, hey, this thing that happened, really hurt, and I want you to know that. And maybe by having that conversation, it will be easier for you to forgive because there can be some clearing of the air. Or you can at least acknowledge, okay, this is who that person is, and they're showing no remorse. And so I'm just going to forgive because that's the best that they can do right now. And it's only going to hurt me, and it's only going to hurt us and our team if I don't. The next generosity is of sharing more deeply who you are. So in a way, this is kind of the flip end of this idea of showing that you care to others. Because the more that you can share who you are, the more that you share about what you care about and not compartmentalize your life into work versus home, but to really help your team see who you are. It's such a gift for them to get to know you because they can see you in a different light, in a bigger light, in your bigger light. And it means something when people are able to receive your vulnerabilities or to receive the truth about you. They get to know you more. That's such a gift. So don't underestimate the value of sharing yourself with your team because it helps them get to know more of who you are. And it's appreciated. It does matter. The next generosity is around trust. And it's really connected, I think, to all generosities when I think about it. Think about it. When you trust in somebody, it's a big way of how you can stay out of micromanaging. It's how you instead lean into conversations around aligned expectations and openness that things can be done differently than maybe perhaps you would do. This requires trusting your people to do the best that they can with good intentions. And if things don't work out the way that you need them to, okay, great. Well, then you can have more conversations so that things can be done in a way that they need to be done. And you can continue to give trust because people sense when you don't trust them. It makes them nervous. Perhaps it means that they are going into perfectionism mode because they don't want to disappoint you. And the greatest gift that you can give somebody is trust. And we live in a world where sometimes there are people that believe that trust has to be earned versus trust can be given. The generosity of your trust is critical because people can feel and sense when you don't trust them. And you may be nervous. It might be really hard for you to be trusting right out of the gate. And there's different philosophies around, do you earn trust or do you give trust and then risk it being eroded? That's a very personal decision. I personally believe in giving trust first because that builds a really deep relationship and goes a long way right in the beginning. In terms of giving trust, when you can do this truly and really allow for what happens, even if it doesn't come out the way that you would have exactly done it or exactly wanted it to come out, what you're doing is you're staying out of this micromanaging element, which nobody likes to be micromanaged, but we can easily fall into micromanagement. And the reason we fall into that is because we're not trusting our people. So generosity of trust is huge. The next one I want to talk about is generosity of network introductions. Who do you know that could be of support or help to those in your stead? sometimes the folks that work for us, they need not just your leadership, but they also need other advisors and mentors. You can't play every role for your employees. So introducing folks, maybe it's even somebody with the technical expertise that can support them in their job. Maybe it's even your own network that's looking for opportunities and you know somebody that might be able to help them. These are all ways to be generous with your network versus hoarding your network, which I personally am not a big fan of. I think it's withholding access to me is just withholding your own blessings to come back. But I digress. That's a whole nother episode probably. All right. The last generosity, though there are many more types of generosity. The last one I wanted to share with you today is about opportunities and opening doors for others. It can be very much linked to this idea of the network connection, but I also want to bring this up in terms of letting somebody else, for example, lead the meeting or present the findings of the project. Giving others exposure and a chance to expand or grow goes such a long way in building that deep relationship of building trust and also of developing other leaders and not just followers. So are you generous with giving folks opportunities and not hoarding them all for yourself? That's a really good one to contemplate. So I want to talk about the resistance to this generosity, because I know there is resistance. Some of it is you're aware of, and some of it may be really under the surface. So let's talk about resistance to generosity. First of all, being generous may take more time or energy from you, and these can be roadblocks to making those choices. The key to overcoming this resistance is to decondition from the overemphasis on productivity and efficiency. Remember that leadership is the long game. Building relationships is the long game of your career and of the results that you're looking for. The other resistance that might come is the fact that, people may burn you, and that may make you want to pull back on generosity. And the thing about getting burned is, look, it's important to honor the lessons that you've learned about individuals. But don't mistakenly apply that to a whole population. That is where you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. And in the newsletter that I talked about, one of the things I mentioned was I pulled back on my generosity because I had been getting burned. But those were some specific individuals. And I started to see how I was then nervous about being generous with other people. And that made me feel like less of myself. So yeah, be careful not to apply a lesson you learned about an individual to a whole population. The next resistance that I think people have toward generosity is that you don't see it modeled. And you may think that you have to show up as others do to be successful with where you are or where you're going. And this is just a bold-faced inner critic lie. Because just because you don't see the leadership approach that feels right or aligned for you, it doesn't mean it's not legit. It doesn't mean it's not effective. And it doesn't mean that your company isn't going to embrace it. In fact, it's probably needed. So stop comparing the way that you lead or the way that you want to lead with what you're seeing out there, because trust me, there is not enough good model leadership out there for us to say, we should be able to see it out there and be able to model that. No, that's not true. You are here to be the model for others. You are here to show that leadership can be done differently than what we've seen for the past decades. That hasn't been working. All right. And the last piece about the resistance is I think we can easily tell ourselves it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if I take the time and do that thing, but it does. And I want to give you just a really recent story of this. I was hosting a couple of friends / colleagues recently, and I really wanted them to come and have a great time and a great experience. And so I went out of my way to go to one of my favorite Italian shops here in Brooklyn to get the best charcuterie board ingredients that I could. And I could have taken the short, quick, efficient route and gone to the place right around the corner from me, but I didn't. I wanted to be generous with my time and generous with my intention of creating a great experience. And, I wasn't sure, were they going to notice that these ingredients were really top notch? Were they going to notice? I don't know. But actually, they really did. They really recognized it was special, that the ingredients were special, that the love that I poured into everything was special. And it's just a reminder that when something is important to you and you're being generous because it's important to you, then other people will receive that because of the intention in which you're doing the thing. And, I'll give you another quick example that happened just today. I took the time to respond to an email. I didn't have to. There wasn't a requirement, but I took the time to just give an acknowledgement to the person who sent this email. And I gave them an update on my situation, which also they didn't ask for or need, but I thought it would be an honor to them and to what they had been working on to do so. And, I sent that because I felt like it was a generous thing to do. And I didn't expect anything in return, but what I got back was this big, I got this email back pretty quickly with such appreciation. And it said in big, bold letters at the top, "You are wonderful." And it made that person's day. It made them feel a little bit more seen and a little bit more heard and a little bit more recognized. So even though we may feel like this is a big lift, oh, I'm sending this email, I have a million other things to do, it really does matter. And we can diminish to ourselves saying, oh, it's not going to matter. They're not going to care. They're not even going to read it. We can do that and we can stop the generosity from flowing. So I invite you to pay attention to what you might be telling yourself that's holding yourself back from being generous. And the other thing about telling ourselves it doesn't matter is that we may be doing something generous, but we don't pay attention to the results. So we may decide to do a thing, but then we don't collect the data to show that thing was really worth it, actually. So, for example, we may not pay attention to the facial expressions. We may not read the email fully because we're just dismissing it without really letting it in that somebody really appreciated that act of kindness or generosity. As with any muscle you're building to make it stronger, it's important to pay attention to the results that you're getting. And those results may not be immediate. You may need to look at those results over time. Maybe your employee has a little bit more softness towards you. Maybe there's a little bit less harshness or a little bit less tension because over time they are believing that the generosity is real and there's no strings attached. Because this is something else to pay attention to. When we start to shift and change, when we show up as the best leader we can be, there might be a little hesitancy from other people who maybe are confused about, is this real? Is this who you're becoming? Is this who you are now? Or am I going to get the old version of you tomorrow that's, the harsh version or the one that doesn't sit and listen to your story about what happened over the weekend for 20 minutes? You have to give people time to trust you. And it doesn't happen overnight. So don't be discouraged if you're not seeing the results right away. Sometimes it takes a little time for people to be like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. So I'm so glad that you tuned into this episode because I think generosity can be a real game changer for you showing up the best version of yourself, not just for yourself, but for those that you lead and interact with. And I want to leave you with a few questions that you can journal on or you can think about as it relates to generosity. And the first one is, where has generosity been given to you and what changed as a result? Perhaps what changed in that relationship, what changed in your life, what opened up for you, what was different? The second question is, what are your thoughts around generosity as a leadership quality? Is it something you believe in? Is it something that you think is important? What is your belief about generosity in leadership? And the last one is, how might you want to embed generosity in your leadership approach moving forward? It's so important to be intentional about how we lead, our choices and how we show up. So this last question is really about reflecting on who you want to be as a leader, what you want to model as a leader, and what you hope gets continued on in those that are under your watch. I think that's like a really good testament to, are you creating more leaders or more followers? What is your intention? And then what are those actions that will lead to the development of leaders versus more followers? There's a lot to say about generosity and its value in the world, its value in your leadership. And I hope today gave you some new ways of thinking about it and some new ways of being intentional, because we can easily let our days, our weeks, our months slip by without thinking about how we want to show up. So hopefully this is providing you an opportunity to do that. And actually, generosity could be a great conversation that you have with your team, to learn about what other people think about generosity and the impact it's had on them. I think there's a great opportunity with all of my podcast episodes for you to take this content into your team meetings as a way to talk about the team culture that you're building and the development of your people professionally and personally. And if I can be of any support in your journey as a leader, please reach out. I'm easy to get in touch with. You can find my contact information in the notes on this platform. And thank you again for showing up to the Unlock Lab. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. Ciao for now.